Welcome to School and Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds, featuring prominent leaders, subject matter experts, and thought innovators with their perspectives on the current challenges facing K-12 education. I am your host, Larissa Napolitan, a former teacher, instructional coach, and a member of the Branching Minds team, here to lead conversations and to shine a light on phenomenal educators and those that are on a mission to transform our schools and the lives of students. Maybe you've been listening for a while, or this is your first episode. If you like what you hear, would you do us a favor by rating and reviewing us on iTunes? This is a fantastic way to tell us you enjoy what we are creating. Also, if you want more MTSS resources, sign up for our weekly newsletter using the link in our show notes, and check out our website for all the blogs and guides you would ever need about MTSS. Today on the podcast, I have the pleasure of chatting with Catherine Cueva from the Hempstead Union Free School District in Long Island, New York. She is the director of MTSS for the district, and she's just here to chat with us about MTSS and the work that she's doing. And so welcome. We're so glad to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
Well, so Catherine, give us a little context of, what does a director of MTSS do in a school district? Maybe there's a bunch of things underneath that umbrella, but for today, what does it look like for you today?
Wow. Okay. So parts of my responsibility, or the responsibilities that I've taken on, is to ensure that we have systems and processes in place to support all our students, which is a huge undertaking sometimes because I really take that literal when it comes to all our students. So I work under the special education department, yet I really truly look at it very holistically in those supports that we put in place, not only for our students with disabilities, but also with our general education students who may need additional support. So I look at the entire big picture, and so I'm involved in a lot of things. So part of those responsibilities include I'm part of the curriculum and instruction team, for example. Why? Because that's huge. We can't have an MTSS without a tier 1. And so part of that is making sure that we are really looking at it with that global thought process of problem solving and what are we doing in our tier 1? I also supervise all what some people may call AIS teachers, which we have now transferred to call them interventionists. So I supervise our interventionists who do tier 3 intervention, and I kind of support them in that initiative on how to support students who have been identified in need of tier 3. And that is it. I'm going to keep it nice and sweet and in a nutshell, but that's basically what I do.
I think it's hard sometimes to drill it down to a nutshell, right? Like when you describe all the things, it's kind of when they say of what is the job of a teacher? Like there's so many things that educators do on a daily basis that are hard to put into a job description. And I think that at every level, whether you're in the classroom, administrator, at the building level, or even at the district level, there's always the all hands on deck of we do the things that need to be done and support all of our teachers and our educators in the buildings. And so I just appreciate that you talk of that you kind of have a part of all the different areas. So, and I think
including sorry, don't mean to interrupt, but including behavior, right? Because I kind of looked at both parts of the system. So.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to say that's a pretty good picture of MTSS in general, that it is an umbrella over all of those different things. And so it's fully fitting that you're involved in a lot of the different areas. So maybe describe a little bit about your journey with MTSS and understanding that, because I can imagine, some people I talk to, MTSS is kind of a new thing, and some people it's something that they've kind of evolved in from other areas. So maybe describe a little bit for our listeners, your journey with MTSS.
So my journey with MTSS starts with truly understanding systems and implementation science. Truly, I'm actually a career changer. So I understand systems in general because I actually come from, I have a business background, I have a behavior background, I have an organizational behavior management background. So I understand the bigger systems of educational organizations. So that I think is crucial for me, at least from my lens, to understand how systems and processes and procedures work. So that is some part of my background. I began as a special education teacher, and then was pulled out of the classroom to coordinate the entire system from applied behavior analysis. So I was able to be a coordinator in a school and did that particular work. And then I then kind of implemented our PBIS in another school. So I came with a different backgrounds. And when I was hired here at Hempstead, I was first hired as the RTI coordinator because they wanted to focus on supporting teachers to provide supports for students, especially from that pre-referral lens. And that's why I kind of look at it from a pre-referral lens model. But for me, because prior to that, how I was kind of going back, prior to that, I was supporting the state. That's really, I was
Mm-hmm.
supporting the state as a behavior specialist. I was supporting part of a grant, and I was doing a lot of the work with MTSS. And then when I came to Hempstead, I was hired as an RTI coordinator, and that led to, okay, we need to, this is not, we're looking at an entire system. So for me, it was more about being more proactive than just looking at RTI and what RTI meant. And that was just one little piece that was not going to address all the needs of our district. So I started bringing and saying MTSS, bringing it from the perspective of how are we supporting our students to
Mm-hmm.
ensure that they're receiving what they're getting. But then I also looked at it, okay, so our students are being supported by teachers. How are we supporting our teachers? And then I was
Mm.
like, okay, because I was at the district level, and then I was like, how am I supporting my school leaders to support their teachers that need to support their students? And so it started to become more of a sequence of those understanding what that meant and understanding what that meant within the system.
Well, I think what you said about sort of having that pre-referral lens, I think that that's the idea that, MTSS is preventative in the sense that it is helping identify students who may be at risk of, of needing further help. And so I think that that's a good way to look at it. Like, what are all those things that happen beforehand?
And not only for me, it was also making sure that our students with disabilities were being included within our process of everything we did. And it was not just because, okay, now he or she has been now referred and now has been identified as a student with a disability. And now potentially he or she is in a self-contained classroom or an ICT classroom, which is co-teaching for. At the end, it was truly about how we provided that support. So like for me, it was MTSS meant more about truly like what it says in the title, you know, tiers, systems of support for the different diverse students, that population that we have, where I felt like when we were looking at RTI was just that one component of RTI, or at least the way it was implemented, not necessarily because historically that's what it was, but
Mm-hmm.
that's the way it was implemented in many schools. They were looking at it only from one angle. And
Mm-hmm.
it didn't catch on that it needed to be much more proactive, and how the universal screeners were supposed to truly give us an opportunity to say, okay, we identify these students. What supports do they need? We identify them with
Mm-hmm.
social, emotional, behavioral health. We identify them based on the data. The data told
Mm-hmm.
us these students need this. And now what are we going to do to provide that for them and see what that leads us to?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think sometimes in my understanding, like special education, like falls under the umbrella of MTSS, but it's not necessarily like the, it falls under the system, but not necessarily like it's the end all be all of like it's not the point of the pyramid, right? Like there,
Exactly. So it
yeah.
was like students with disabilities need to receive tier one. They may need tier two. and they may need tier three. And so it's not a means to an end, what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
It's truly the supports of all our students and based on their needs, because we're trying to ensure that we are providing the right level of support, and
Mm-hmm.
and our students are moving and growing and learning regardless of their identification, whether they're English language learners, whether they're students with disability. When you just think about it from that simplistic view, it seems like small yet huge, because we know that there's not one student alike. So they come with all intricacies, right?
Well, and I think that idea that MTSS is a holistic way to approach student needs. And so, because I think sometimes if we only narrow it down to academics, we're forgetting other essential parts of human beings. And so I think that that's where, because so much of that is integrated. I used to teach middle school, and I just thought, I just always think about, like, there are some students that, like, in order to be academically ready, they had to be emotionally ready for the day. And so sometimes that meant, like, having those pre-conversations with them. Are you ready to learn? Is there a need that you need to have met before, if they're hungry, or they, just simple things like that, that really making sure that their needs are met so that they're ready to learn. And so I feel like when you talk about MTSS as a framework and a system, it's meant to kind of encapsulate everything that a school should be doing, right? Like we talk about all the time, like these are all the things that we want to do as educators to make sure that the students can learn. So speaking of students, and I'm sure in your years of experience, you probably have countless stories, but is there one story of either a student or even group of students or even group of teachers in your work that you feel like really encapsulates the power that MTSS can have?
Oh, wow. Yes, I think that, wow, that's a big question, because I can really think of many, many examples of from a lens of a student. I can say I'm going to give you a behavioral health, or from a behavioral sense. I'm going to give it to you from that, because sometimes that is the one area where there's sometimes struggles as soon as a student engages in a particular behavior that may be disruptive to an environment. A teacher may not feel prepared to be able to put the supports in place to support that student. So, which means that they're not feeling prepared to provide the support, that means that student is being referred out or be sent out. And then there's this vicious cycle where the student is going back into the classroom, and then being pulled out because we're not putting the right supports in place to support that student. And there was one particular student last year that touched my heart, a student who had many needs. I can't, for confidentiality, I can't share a lot, but all I can share is that he had enormous amount of needs. And as far as from a behavioral stance, he was not able to sit still. The student was demonstrating a lot of difficulty. The teachers were reporting a lot of struggles. He would have some verbal outbursts. He tried to elope the classroom. So there was many, many issues that you automatically think this was not a student who was classified. This is a student who did not have a pre-K experience. So he was coming into our kindergarten experience. He was going into first grade. There was a lot of trauma, without going into more detail than that, a lot of things happening in this child's life. So it was going into this first grade class, and they not really understand the expectations of having to sit down, and the length of sitting down that you need to do now in a first grade classroom, and what is the expectations in this first grade classroom, and what do I need to kind of do? A child who academically, you would be asking him questions, and he was able to respond to these questions, but yet was having some difficulty. And so from an MTSS perspective, one of the things was to kind of work on that mind shift of saying, okay, what supports can we put in place? And how, and not only now after putting a support, it's not only putting a support, I could say, okay, here, provide choices to the student, here, provide this type of reinforcement system. But at the end, what that child needed was time. And MTSS for me, when we're talking about a tier system of support, we have to really be very, very cognizant of that. when we have identified students in need of support, whether it's academic or behaviorally, what we need to do is time and let the data dictate the movement of the things that we need to do. So
Mm,
for me, it kind of goes hand in hand, right? Providing any kind of supports that we put in place, need time and data so that we know the adjustments of the things that we need to do and how that student's responding. And it was hard. It was not easy, but the success part of it was that after many meetings with the team, it was the team of teachers, and many meetings of just kind of working a plan, doing fidelity checks, supporting the teachers and making sure that they felt supported because it was extremely important, that we started seeing that our adult behavior had an impact on the student,
mm,
and the student was able to thrive and do well in his setting in the classroom.
mhm.
But it took time, data, and adjustments. So we had to plan some things and make adjustments and support the teacher, support the student to kind of be successful, to be not
Yeah.
kind of be successful, to be successful.
Yeah. Well, and I think that you hit the nail on the head in the fact of like you kind of have to give it space, give the intervention space to work, like and that time and checking in to see is like are is what we're doing and having an impact. And sometimes I think, especially I think behaviorally, like the often students need to see is like, are the teachers going to continue to follow through with the things that we put in place? Because I know as a middle school teacher, sometimes it's easy to like forget that consistency is going to help. Having that consistent structure and space the boundaries of that can be really helpful as far as like with behaviorally goes. But that's awesome that that student was able to find success. And I think young students, it's really important to give them time to get there, especially if they haven't had that experience beforehand. So that's really
Absolutely.
awesome.
Mhm.
So how about with teachers? Have you, because I know now that you work at a director level, you probably a lot of your work just happens with teachers and not so much directly with one student. Have you found that MTSS has been a powerful way to impact your staff and in their practices?
At my level, at the district level, I work a lot with the school leadership because the school leadership has direct impact with their day-to-day work of our teachers. I also work with our teachers because I am a huge believer. I'm a very hands-on that kind of person. As you can tell, I go from the student level all the way to the district level because it is in my heart of heart to see the success of all our students, regardless of where they are at. So some of my work with teachers have been more in that group of teachers, those aha moments when data, like where they have seen that things, that the data that we put in place. So that the interventionists that are teachers, they're the AIS teachers, academic intervention services or interventionists. We there was a lot of aha moments this year. So for me, it was creating a structure from an academic perspective with those particular teachers and actually helping them understand the difference between intervention and it's, like from instruction, right? What's prescriptive, whether what is the prescription that we want to put in place, right? Like we need to be very targeted and very specific, and why we have to do weekly progress monitoring. Why was that important? Um, and I think that there was many moments where the interventionists had a lot of questions for me this school year, especially because this was something that was new for them. But for me, it was about providing grace, providing time, providing the professional development, providing a listening ear, and making sure that I was listening to their needs and making sure that as best as I could, I was meeting those needs because
Mhm.
that is in the truest model for me. MTSS includes providing the supports to teachers. Was it perfect? Absolutely not. Was there moments of true messiness and confusion? Absolutely. uh, but I think towards the end of the year, we saw um, a lot of great progress from our teachers and our teachers who were, like I said, have come out of the classroom to be interventionists, and their success. And they came to me with how excited it was to see students grow, how excited it was to be able to say, okay, this student no longer needs intervention. That was a big one because in years past, AIS, in their practice of AIS, a student would go in, they would get their service through AIS and stay the entire year with them.
Mm.
And so this year was like, no, we're going by cycles, and we're going to have SMART goals, and we're going to do this. And there was a lot of changes, but I would say that there was a lot of success, and I would not be able to do this without them. So kudos to all our interventionists and teachers who are out there, but that was very
Yeah.
important for me.
Well, I think I like what you were talking about with the idea of like, the different cycles, because I think being able to see that progress, and when you see success in what you're doing, like you're more excited to keep going, right? Like I think that's just human nature. Is like when we see success and we see what's working, we buy in more and more into that process. And so I think that grows the fan club of MTSS when you get to see that progress. I wanted to go back to something you talked about when you were talking about that student, that had behavioral challenges. Something you talked about was really supporting the teachers. And I think that is such an essential part of MTSS, is that support for teachers, because that is a difficult place to be, especially when you talk about behavior, when students are struggling. And if you as a teacher feel unsupported in helping that student, you feel very alone. And I think that any teacher can relate to that, of feeling very alone in your struggle. And so like being able to build a system that is supporting the teachers along the way as they do the work with the particular students, that can be really a big part of your MTSS success. So I like that you talked extensively about that and just providing all the things that you do for your teachers. Well, I just really appreciate like all that you have shared, and I am excited to just like kind of dig into this question a little bit more. But what would you want others to know about implementing MTSS?
It takes time. I want everybody to know that it is truly understanding of the system, right, and the processes, and looking at what already exists within the system, because the school did not. So MTSS is a new title of something, right? So I'm not a believer. I'm a believer of looking at what exists and looking at making sure that we are having processes that truly are going to support our students. And so continuously to do that and tighten those processes up is the most important part of MTSS, because at the end, when we think of our educational organizations, we know that whether we're coming in from outside or whether we're inside and you're hearing this word MTSS, it truly is looking and saying, okay, what am I doing? What are the processes I'm taking, and how are these aligning and supporting how are these aligning with the district, and how are these supporting the students that I have in front of me? Because at the end, in the classroom as a teacher, it's what am I doing for the students in front of me? Mm-hmm. As a school leader, it's what am I doing for my teachers to ensure that they're doing the right thing for the students that are in front of them. So I feel like if we remove this concept of MTSS as this new term and make it more about the supports that we have and the processes, the systems and the procedures and the things that we are doing, and saying, is this truly supporting? Is this equitably supporting the students' needs? And if it's not, then we need to take a step back, reflect, and tighten up what we're doing. Because at the end, if we make it seem something so big and foreign, then it's not going to happen. But if we're working together as a community, collectively, then that is what, for me, MTSS is.
Oh, I think you're right. Because I think every community has different kinds of supports that their students need, right? Like every community is different in that way. And I like to think of MTSS as the umbrella that holds all of your different supports and different resources and everything together, because every community is going to need something different. And so I think that that's really key to understanding of like, it's not a new thing. It's just like a way to think about how you're supporting your students and a structure in place to make sure that all of the students are getting what they need. And they're in an equitable way. I think that that's really key. I like that you mentioned that. Catherine, there's so much more that we probably could talk about. I love these conversations.
I'm way too overzealous and passionate about MTSS.
Well, you're in the right place. This is what I get to do every day. So I love being able to talk about this. Thank you so much for your time today. And I just really hope that you have a wonderful school year.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Schoolin' Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds. Go ahead and subscribe to our feed wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, if you are enjoying our content, would you do us a favor and rate and review our podcast on iTunes? This helps others find our podcast and lets us know how much you love what we're creating. Branching Minds is an educational technology company using learning sciences and technology to help districts effectively personalize learning through MTSS. To learn more about us, check out our website, branchingminds.com, or follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn @Branching Minds.